West Virginia. Hello. All right, guys, I'm just going to start with a short introduction. You will hear some other people who are joining in the waiting room. I am online today with my wonderful colleague, Bonnie Brannigan. She is our Vice President of Marketing. She is the brains behind a lot of what you guys see on our poultry posts and our poultry information. She's actually going to kind of run the switchboard for us tonight. So she's letting everyone into the meeting, and she's going to share some information on the chat. So if you see any information coming from Bonnie Brannigan, that's who that is. She is a really integral part of Kalmbach Feeds, and I'm so glad that she's here tonight to help make this happen for all of you guys. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight for our chick webinar. This is, probably the third chick webinar that we have done at Kalmbach Feeds. We are going to share links later in the presentation that has all of our previous webinars. So if anyone wants to go back and look at that information or watch those webinars, we will share where all of that information is today. So we're really excited today to talk about chicks, the different nutrient needs of birds and their growth phases, what to look for, and those types of things. So I just want to start today by introducing myself. My name is Nancy Jefferson. I am a poultry nutritionist with Kalmbach Feeds, and I'm also the backyard poultry specialist. So my day-to-day duties include formulating feed and answering questions, generating content, not necessarily all the content. That Bonnie and her team do most of that, but answering the questions, kind of writing some of the articles, a lot of that information that we share with you guys to help all of us be better poultry keepers. I live with my husband, John, in Crown City, Ohio, and between the two of us, we have 3 children, a stepdaughter who's 15, and then I have 2 sons who are 5 and 7, so still have little kids. I'm also a poultry keeper myself. I love birds. So I have about 30 chickens and ducks. I absolutely love my chickens and ducks. It's one of my passions. So I'm really fortunate to be able to do this for a living and share my passion and work in it day to day. So that's just briefly a little bit about me. As I mentioned before, Bonnie Brannigan is also on this meeting with us. So she will be kind of working the switchboard, sharing links with you guys, talking to you in the chat. So look for her name. She's a huge asset. So first thing I want to talk about today is I want to actually tell you guys some really exciting news. So today we're going to do a chick webinar, but in addition to this, we have actually put together a chick poultry course. So Raising Healthy Chicks 101, a very good basic outline about raising chicks, anything you need to know. It's a self-paced course. So it's something that you can take if you want to binge it, and I binged it. So when we put it together, I binged the whole thing in one setting. So you're welcome to binge it, or if you want to take just a few minutes out of your day and do each individual module, whatever works for you guys. But we're going to share the link to that, and you're also going to receive an invitation for the course. It's going to be really fun. There's going to be a community available where people can ask questions. I'll be there to help answer the questions. It's going to be kind of a really great thing for everyone to do. It's all online, so really easy, all self-paced, so you don't have to join at a certain time unless we decide in the community that we want to. But it's going to be so much fun. So you guys watch for that link. It's going to go all the way from getting new baby chicks until those baby chicks actually graduate to laying hens. So you can watch the whole thing. You can learn about the whole process from beginning to end. And if anybody out there doesn't already have chicks and you're kind of on the fence and you're not sure, hopefully after this webinar tonight, you can go out and get them, and then you can follow along in the course and you can see how your birds are doing, know exactly the next steps you're supposed to take. So it's going to be a whole lot of fun. We're really, really excited about this course and launching this, and we will definitely have information about that in the chat in the latter parts of the seminar. We're also want to thank everyone for joining tonight. So everyone here is going to receive a copy of our chick naming guide. It's a really fun guide that everyone will receive. And it has all the different names, the most popular poultry names. If you're new to chickens or you got new chicks this year, it'll help you pick the best names for your new girls if you're interested in naming them. So watch for that. It's our thank you because we really appreciate you guys spending the evening with us tonight. So I think we have a few more people that we are going to go ahead and allow in from the waiting room. Let's see, we have 84 and then we have 25 in the waiting room. So we have a really good turnout tonight. Go ahead and put where you're from in the chat if you haven't already. And as soon as we start getting those folks entered, we are going to start watching that chick webinar. Let's see, we have Florida, California, and Texas, and Montana, big sky country. I've been there. Okay, a few more people coming in. Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. Make sure you keep your chats open tonight, guys, because we're going to answer most of the questions from the chat. I did try to answer as many of the chick-related questions as I could while we went through the webinar, while we did that. But if there are any of them that we didn't hit, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll try to answer the chick questions first, since this is a chick-related webinar. But if we do have time, we'll try to go over some other ones that are not particularly chick related, or we'll definitely tell you where you can find those answers in some of our library of information. Anybody else in the waiting room? I think we're good. So Bonnie, whenever you're ready, we'll start the video.
Everybody, welcome to our chick seminar. We are so excited to show you guys some of the different growth phases of chickens, answer a lot of your questions that you pre-submitted, and we have some really great bird examples to show you guys today. I'm here at my friend Sarah Ranker's farm. She has lots of different types of birds, and so she has some really great examples to share with you guys about birds in different phases of growth. So since this is a chick seminar, I thought it would be helpful if we talked about the chicks in their different phases, how we feed those birds, what nutrients are important, what physiological things are happening in those particular phases. So today we want to start with our baby chicks. So these little babies are about 2 weeks old, maybe just a little, maybe right about 2 weeks old based on their feathers. So these baby chicks are in the starter phase. As you can tell, they still have a lot of their cute fluffy down. They do have some feather development on their wings here, but for the most part, they're still not fully feathered. Now, what's really important about that is that chicks in the starter phase, so before they have their feathers, are not actually able to adequately regulate their body temperature. They can find their food, they can find their water, but they need our help to actually maintain proper body temperature because they use their feathers to actually help maintain their body feather. So, or their body temperature, excuse me. So what happens to birds in the starter phase? Physiologically, what is happening for these chicks is when that little baby chick hatches out of that egg, it has not started to digest any feed yet. It does not have a well-developed immune system. It is immunocapable, which means that it has the ability to fight disease, but it hasn't been exposed to any diseases yet. So they have to start developing their immune system at that point, and they have to start putting on their feathers. So the starter phase is really where they start most of their bodily functions. Developing that digestive tract, concentrating on that immune system, and putting on those feathers. So I have some examples of feed back here to show you guys. So you know exactly what feed is the appropriate one to choose based on the age of your birds, what type of birds you have. And I did want to talk a little bit more in depth about nutrition, how these birds use their nutrients during their different phases. So these babies are chicks that are intended to become laying hens. So these girls are going to become part of Sarah's laying flock. When you have birds that are intended to become laying hens, the best options for those girls are going to be in the lower protein range. So if we look at these feeds, typically our starter grower feeds are going to be in the 18 to 22% protein range. We'll go a little higher for things like turkeys or game birds like that, but for most of our chickens, we're going to be in the 18 to 22% protein range. So you might wonder, well, how do I know which type of feed to choose? So most of our chicks that are intended to become laying hens are either going to be egg-laying strains or they're going to be really good dual-purpose birds. Most of those breeds are actually slower growing. So since they're slower growing, they don't require quite as much nutrient density in order to maximize or really grow at a fast rate. Since these girls are slower growing, typically we feed these girls at the lower density level, so around 18% protein. So we have Chick House Reserve and we have our 18% Start Right chick feed. If you're raising birds that are intended to become laying hens, these are probably going to be the top 2 feeds I would recommend if you called into the office and they sent you to me. So these are really great options for these birds. So one thing to consider for the chicks that are intended to become laying hens, when you look at a feed tag for those chicks, the first nutrient you're going to see on all poultry feeds is crude protein. Crude protein is probably the most familiar nutrient for all of us who have animals. But right below that, there are going to be 2 nutrients called lysine and methionine. Those 2 nutrients are amino acids, and amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So when birds eat a feed, when you look at those feed tags, lysine is used really for growth and muscle building, muscle accretion. Methionine is one of our prominent amino acids we use for feather growth. So when these birds are really small, when they're little babies like this and they're putting on their feathers, which is one of the main functions they do in the starter phase, you want to look for feeds with really good methionine levels, because while crude protein is very important, the amino acids that make up that protein are actually more important. So check out those amino acid levels. They're really important for those chicks, and based on where those birds are in their growth cycle is going to, whatever amino acid that they need the most at that particular time is going to be based on where they are in their growth cycle. So these little baby starter chicks are going to start developing their digestive system. They're going to start digesting feed, so they haven't digested feed before. That's a new thing for them. They're also going to start developing their immune system. So when this little tiny chick hatches, when it pips out of that egg, it actually does not have a very mature immune system. Since they're really vulnerable and their immune system is not well established, that's why it's really common to find medicated starter feeds. So when you look at your feeds, if a feed is medicated, at Kalmbach, we put very clearly on the bag, medicated. But if you're feeding anything other than Kalmbach, or check your feed tags, because if the feed is medicated, we have to state that on the feed tag. We'll tell you exactly what the medication is, and we'll tell you exactly how you use that medication. Now for chick feeds, the vast majority of the time, that medication is going to be amprolium. And amprolium is used for the prevention of coccidiosis. So just keep in mind, if you're looking at medicated feeds, that medication is not broad spectrum. It's not meant to work for every issue that a chick may have. It's actually intended specifically for the prevention of coccidiosis. So just keep that in mind. If you have a respiratory issue, or you might think you have a viral issue, switching to medicated feed might not have any advantage, because that medication is actually specifically for coccidiosis. So these baby girls have 3 main functions to do during their starter phase. They're going to develop their digestive tract. They're going to hone in and develop their immune system, and they're going to put on their feathers. Now the immune function is actually really important for these birds. There are lots of different nutrients that are used to help with immune function. Vitamins and minerals surprisingly do a lot of that work. But there's a product in most of our poultry feeds, and actually it's in all of our chick feeds, called LifeGuard. And LifeGuard is a proprietary blend of prebiotics, probiotics, essential oils, and digestive enzymes. And LifeGuard works by helping these baby chicks develop really good, healthy guts, because the vast majority of our immune function actually happens in our gut. Chickens and people, we digest feed in very similar manners. We're both monogastrics. So a lot of our immunity happens in our gut. And so if we can set these babies up to have really good, healthy guts from the time they're teeny tiny like this, it goes a long way in helping these birds be really healthy long-term for their entire lives. So babies in the starter phase, the three main functions they're doing: developing their digestive tract, developing their immune system, and putting on their feathers. So Sarah's going to switch out birds for me really quick. We're going to switch out our babies in the starter phase to our babies in the grower phase. She's going to hand us some of her babies. Uh-oh, you want to put one in your pocket? So these two girls, we actually don't have two girls here. We actually have one girl and one boy. And the reason why we picked this is I just wanted to show you guys some of the characters once they get a little bit older. We'll do that here in just a sec. But one thing I wanted to focus on now was these babies are in their grower phase. So there are three main ways that most animals will use their nutrients: growth, maintenance, and production. And so these girls, this girl and this boy, they have started to develop their digestive tract. They're digesting their food very well. They're growing very well. They have started to develop their immune system. So at this point, they actually can naturally, try to combat some challenges. Not great challenges, not really big challenges, but if they get a little thing here or there, their innate immune system is actually working really, really well at this point. As you can see, they definitely have their feathers. This guy is so calm. They definitely have their feathers. Look at this beautiful feather covering for these birds. So these guys have to work to maintain all the work they did in the starter phase. So now they have to use their nutrients not just to start their digestive tract and so forth and so on, but they have to maintain all that work. And now they have to grow. So typically when a bird goes from a starter to a grower phase, a few things change in their nutrient needs. For example, usually when they're very, very young, they need a little bit more protein. And as they age, protein requirement actually goes down. Our feeds are developed to be a really good combination of starter and grower feeds. And that helps because you don't have to worry about switching feeds. And we've taken that into consideration. When we formulated those feeds, we know in the beginning they need a little bit more protein, and then as they age, that protein requirement goes down. So we take that into consideration when we formulate the feeds. We have a nice, good medium that meets the
How
needs.
do I get that set where you have questions?
Phases. The other really neat thing about these types of birds,
It is, I did that, but they
these are
usually,
broiler chickens or meat birds like turkeys or Pekin ducks, but for these types of birds, their energy requirement doesn't change that much. It actually goes down a little bit. So normally, as the animal would age, its energy requirement actually changes quite a bit. But for these birds, it doesn't change as much. It doesn't have to go up as much. So we do take that in consideration when formulating the feeds as well. One thing that actually happens for these birds when they get to this age is when they were teeny tiny baby chickens, remember they were putting on their feathers. So they needed a lot of methionine to do that. So that was really one of their most limiting amino acids. They've put on their feathers already. So one of the most important amino acids for them, or one of their most limiting amino acids, now becomes lysine, because they use that amino acid to grow, to put on body mass. So the main things these girls are going to do in this particular phase is just grow at a great rate. Chicks in the grower phase are actually my favorite. The starters, the babies are great, but I love the grower phase. They're so active. They start to use their roosts. They can pretty much, you don't have to normally have the heat lamps or anything depending on breed and age, but they just do such a great job of entertaining you and jumping up on the roost and chasing each other around, and they're really fun in the grower phase. So I really enjoy watching them grow through this particular grower phase. What will happen for these girls is as she ages, these girls are about 6 weeks old, so 5 to 6 weeks old. So they've got a long way to go. They will not reach maturity, sexual maturity, until they're 16 weeks old. So these girls still have another 10 weeks or so before they're gonna be full size. What happens with chickens in the grower phase, and the same thing happens with kids, right? Our kids grow up and then they fill out. So these girls are gonna look like they're full grown by around 3 months or so, but they're gonna need another month or two to actually fill out for their reproductive tract to really start to develop and for them to actually start with reproduction. And that's our egg production. Egg production is reproduction. So when these girls reach sexual maturity, that's when they're ready to start laying eggs. So during this phase, we really feed these birds to help them grow to their maximum potential. Now I have one girl and I have one boy. So I wanted to show you some of the differences. Our pretty little hen here, she's a sapphire gem. Our pretty little hen here is nice and light. Our boy, he's not very big, but he actually has a little more body condition. I can feel some muscle mass developing along his keel, which is, I'll show you guys what the keel is. This bone that runs right along the front of the bird is the keel bone. And when you're feeling birds to feel for conformation, that's one of the first things you want to find is the keel bone. So for her, she's a pretty little dainty pullet, but I can actually feel some more conformation around his keel bone. I can actually feel some meat starting to develop there. You can also tell by looking at him, he has a more developed comb, a more developed wattle. So those are some ways that you can tell once your birds get a little bit older, if they have not been sexed already, if they're boys or girls. Boys also tend to have bigger or thicker legs. They also tend to grow just a little bit faster than the girls. So usually, if you haven't had your birds sexed, so you haven't had them sorted by sex, usually around, depending on the breed, so broiler chickens, and we're going to talk about broiler chickens. Broiler chickens are a lot faster, but usually right around 4 to 6 weeks, you should really start to notice if you got an accidental rooster, which they're actually called slips. I call them oopses. If you have an oops rooster, you're probably going to have an indication that you got one at around 4 to 6 weeks. So you'll probably start to notice he looks a little different. He's bigger. Uh-oh, maybe I got a rooster in this group. But Sarah, she got him on purpose. So he wasn't intentional. He wasn't an oops rooster. But those are the main things that happen during the starter and grower phases. So the vast majority of us who have backyard chickens are getting birds because we intend for them to be laying hens. So most of us who get chicks that we intend to have to be laying hens are going to have 3 phases those birds go through. We talked about the starter phase, the grower phase, and once they reach about 4 months old, then you can switch them over to a layer feed and they have officially graduated to laying phase. So for these baby chicks, it usually takes about 4 to 5 months for them to start laying their first eggs. It depends on the breed. A lot of our really good egg producing genetics will lay earlier, around 4 months to 4.5 months. And some of our big hardy standard breeds might take a little bit longer, around 5 to 6 months. So we're going to switch gears real quick away from our pretty little dainty pullets and our pretty little male here. And we're going to get out a broiler chicken. So Sarah's going to bring me a broiler chicken. Hey guys, so Sarah gave me one of her broiler chickens. She has such a great variety of birds. I wanted to show you some of the big differences between broiler chickens. We saw our dainty little pullets. This broiler chicken and those pullets are actually the exact same age. So these guys grow at a rapid rate. So if you're interested in meat production and you get really good broiler genetics, because these birds are growing so fast and so big, they need really nutrient-dense feeds. So you'll often find for meat birds, because they're getting big, they need the higher protein. So our start to finish meat bird feed is a 22% protein. It's a great option if you're looking to help these birds build body mass. So why do they need extra protein? Why do they need higher levels of amino acids, particularly lysine, to build body mass? And that's because they're growing at a very rapid rate. So if we think about bodybuilders, for example, bodybuilders, they will take protein powders, they'll eat high protein feeds so that they can build muscle. That's exactly what our broiler chickens are doing. They are building muscle. Muscle is meat, and so that's exactly what they're doing. These are our bodybuilders of the chicken world. Sorry, sweetie. This bird, when I feel her keel, I actually can barely feel it. I only know it's there because I know it's there. But she has muscle mass all around her keel, and that's what you want to feel on a good broiler chicken. They should have a lot of their body mass, a lot of weight in the breast, a lot of weight in the legs and thighs. So I'll just put her down for a second so you can see what she looks like when she stands. I don't think she's going to run off, but they look like little round balls, right? She's standing really, really well. She's got good legs underneath her. She's had really good nutrition for her whole life, so that helps a lot. I'll pick her back up. She's had really good nutrition her whole life, so that helps a lot. But one thing we focus on when we feed meat birds, not just protein. There are a few things we also need to talk about when we talk about nutrition for meat birds. Calcium and phosphorus are extremely important for meat birds. And calcium and phosphorus are going to be nutrients that you see on your feed tag. So birds need calcium and phosphorus to help build strong bones. There's a certain ratio, it's about 2 to 1, that we use for most birds that are in the starter and grower phase. That's really, really important for broiler chickens. These birds are growing at such a rapid rate that their body mass can actually outpace their skeletal conformation. So their bodies can get bigger than their bones can actually handle. When that happens, they can get bad legs, they can have swollen hocks, they can get a deformity called tibial dyschondroplasia where their knees don't bend correctly. And a lot of that can be fixed by proper nutrition. So those are some of the things we really look at when we're raising broiler chickens. Sure, protein's important because we do want you guys to be able to grow big broiler chickens, but we also want to make sure we're giving these birds the perfect opportunity for their skeletal conformation to keep up with their rapid rate of growth. So these broiler chickens are beautiful. They are about 6 weeks old, so they're almost ready to be harvested. I'm not sure when Sarah's going to do it, but she's going to have to do it pretty soon. So they are beautiful birds. They've done really, really well. These guys tend to go through their starter phase a little faster than our pretty little dainty pullets. So these broiler chickens will have most of their feathers by about 3 weeks of age. They'll be able to regulate their own temperature by about 3 weeks of age. Some of our slower growing pullets might be more in the 4 to 5 week range. So these guys do grow faster. They go through their starter phases a little bit faster. And most of these broiler chickens are finished with their growth cycle by about 6 to 8 weeks of age. So they should be harvest ready in about 6 to 8 weeks of age. So these are our beautiful birds, our wonderful examples. The feed we choose, or that I would choose for broiler chickens, would be our 22% start to finish meat bird. As I mentioned, it's a little higher protein than, let's say, the feed for our nice dainty pretty pullets, our 18% feeds. Now in the middle, you might notice I have a 20% flock maker. Where does that fit in? Flock maker is an awesome option if you have young poultry other than chickens. So if you have chickens and ducks, or you have chickens and geese, flock makers are a really good option for those birds. It's a little higher protein because most of our waterfowl, our game birds, and our turkeys actually need a little bit higher protein for their growth cycle. It is a great feed because it has a wider range in its nutrient profile, so it fits well for lots of different types of birds. So if you went to your local feed store and they had chicks and ducks and you got talked into buying ducks, it's not hard, believe me. Hold on, Mama. And they had chicks and you decided to get chicks and ducks, the flock maker is probably the right feed for you because it has it has the right nutrient profile for both of those types of birds. Now, one thing to think about when we talk about chicks, I always talk about baby ducks too. If you're going to get baby ducks, you want to make sure you choose a feed like Flock Maker that has all the nutrients that those baby ducks need to, particularly a nutrient called niacin. Niacin is a B vitamin, and ducks actually have pretty high requirements for niacin. And the reason for that is that they're not great at naturally generating niacin. They don't actually produce it, use their food to generate their own niacin in their metabolism. They need extra niacin from the diet. So if you get a good chick feed, if you have ducks and you get a feed, make sure it has enough niacin in it for ducks. Now at Kalmbach, we actually put the niacin content right on our feed tags. So we make it really obvious for you guys, this feed has enough niacin for ducks. But if you have a feed and you're not sure, make sure you call to make sure it has enough niacin in it for those baby ducks. It's a really important B vitamin for them. If they don't get it, they actually get leg problems. And so you want to avoid that so your ducks are able to walk around, move. And it's painful if they do get those leg problems. So you want to make sure you try to avoid that the best that you can. So that's it, guys. Quick review of our starter and grower phases for our birds. So in the starter phase, very generically speaking, that's before feathers. Those babies are developing their digestive tract. They're putting on their feathers and they are starting to develop their immune system. The primary goal of those birds, or what they're doing the most in their grower phase, is of course growing. Makes sense, right? So of course they're growing at a rapid rate in their grower phase. And then once they reach sexual maturity, which is about 4 to 5 months old, that's when those birds are ready to move on to that layer phase. So I hope this helps you guys understand a little bit about how to choose the right feeds, the nutrient needs of the birds, different types of birds in different growth phases. The next thing we're going to do is actually go over some pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to answer those questions for you guys now. And then if you have any other questions along the way, make sure to go ahead and put them in the chat and we will try to answer as many of those as we possibly can. So now we're going to do our pre-submitted questions. But before we get going, I wanted to ask Sarah to come out. Sarah was nice enough to let us film her birds today. And Sarah's a relatively new chicken keeper. So our goal of doing all these webinars, answering your questions and trying to share information is we are really passionate about poultry at Kalmbach. I love my birds. I love all of your birds. And anyone who's on the fence or thinking about getting started, we want to encourage you, please strongly consider it. So Sarah jumped in a couple years ago, and I just wanted her to share maybe a little bit of why did you decide to get chickens, Sarah?
Great question. We always wanted to have a farm, and a couple years ago we had the opportunity to purchase this beautiful farm, and you know, that's when we decided to dive all in. So we've had horses in the past, and we wanted to get into more of the small farm animals, and it's just been really fun. Very low maintenance too, which we like.
Yeah, they are. And so Sarah has small children. Do your girls like the birds?
Yes,
they love it. Yeah.
My girls love the birds. My daughter Zoe, every day she comes and picks up the eggs. She sells her eggs, so she's learning some business stuff too, and it's really, really fun.
Yeah. So is there anything that in the beginning of your journey, what were you most scared? What would have held you back that you think we could help you overcome? Was there anything like was it the brooding phase, or was it just picking the right birds? What was the thing that maybe was the biggest obstacle or the hurdle for you?
Mine was the brooding phase.
Okay.
I was so nervous to bring those tiny chicks home. I think they kept me up more than like when I brought my newborn daughter home. You know, I wanted to make sure the temperature was right and that they were spaced out enough and eating well. That was my most nerve-wracking phase. But soon it was good.
Yeah. So once you actually did it, it wasn't as hard as you thought, right?
Hard
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah. So, and actually this brings us to a really good point. We have a lot of tools developed and already out there for people who are interested in. If you have specific questions about brooding or you're just getting started, we can help you along every aspect of that. And so don't let that hold you back. We hope everybody wants to jump in and get started on this. So far, what's your favorite part about chicken keeping?
Definitely, you know, whenever we go in to feed them, they all come up and like to see us, and we always like giving them strawberries. My big girls, that's their favorite thing is the strawberries. So it's gotten to the point where Zoe, my daughter, she like won't eat half of her
Oh,
strawberries
yeah.
because she wants to give them to the
Yeah.
girls. So it's just fun, and just the whole family. Like my husband loves them. You know, we love getting the eggs, and even like our family, they love getting the fresh eggs
Yeah,
from us.
it's
So
great.
it's
Yeah.
very rewarding.
Yeah,
Very, very
it is.
rewarding.
It is. Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you
You're
for
welcome.
letting us borrow your chickens. We
You're
really
very
appreciate
welcome.
it. So now we're going to cover our pre-submitted questions. If you have any other questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to make sure we answer all of your questions, so we'll do our best to do that. Our first question, I'm trying to answer most of the questions that pertain to chicks first, so I'm going to start with those. Our first question relates to illnesses from poultry. What should I be aware of? What preventions exist? And are there a lot of diseases that are transferred between birds and humans? So the primary diseases that affect most backyard birds, of course, is going to be coccidiosis, and we already talked about that when we talked about medicated feeds. The medication in most medicated feeds is going to be for the prevention of coccidiosis. If you've ever had a cocci outbreak in the past, it's not a bad idea to use those preventatives. Or if you're the type of person who thinks an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and there are a lot of us out there, choosing a medicated starter grower feed just to make sure you don't have any problems is definitely okay. Or you can go non-medicated, either one. That's up to you guys as a consumer. The other main diseases that you're probably going to hear about are Marek's and Newcastle. Marek's is probably the most common backyard poultry disease. It's spread in dander from other birds, and so it's something that if birds get it, they're really highly susceptible to it. Marek's and Newcastle are viruses, so those are things that you can have your birds vaccinated for at the hatchery. Those are common hatchery vaccinations. So those are things to consider when you're actually picking out your chicks or ordering your chicks. Do you want those chicks to be vaccinated for those very common diseases? I personally do get my chicks vaccinated because they are such common diseases. I work with poultry a lot, and so I feel like I need that extra protection. As far as diseases that are transferred from humans to chickens, there actually isn't a lot of disease that gets transferred from one species to the other. Some examples of where that could happen, there are certain strains of avian influenza. We currently have an avian influenza outbreak. That particular strain has not been commonly transferred to humans, but those types of influenzas, it's possible that they could, but the one we have right now has not. The other one to really consider is salmonella. So salmonella is a bacteria that birds can get. They can transfer that, comes out in the poop. They can transfer that to humans. If humans actually accidentally ingest that poop, either from unwashed hands or contaminated eggs or something along those lines, those people can get sick. For the most part, the viruses don't transfer from chicken to human, but some of the bacteria can. Coccidiosis does not. So the next thing, the next question is, what is the best chick feed? Do you like grains or crumbles? So I have examples of the two feeds here. This is our Chick House Reserve. We have some on the floor too, or some on the ground too. Chick House Reserve is actually a textured chick feed. It has all those individual components. If you love Hen House Reserve, you're gonna love Chick House Reserve. Chick House Reserve is a beautiful feed. It is a complete feed for those birds. We also have our 18% Start Right chick feed. This one is a crumble. So this feed is actually just a traditional chick crumble. It's a really high quality crumble, very little fines, very little dust, really high quality feed. Now, when we develop these two feeds, we actually have the nutrient profile between the two very similar. So your birds should perform at a similar rate, whichever one that you choose. I've really liked Chick House Reserve. The chicks love it. They actually prefer it to the crumble about 3 times more often. If you give them both feeds and you give them the option, they actually go to the Chick House Reserve feeder about 3 times more often than they do the standard crumble. It's got those individual components. It's a really beautiful, really good looking feed. But as far as your performance is concerned, both of them are gonna do great. I've raised chicks on both products. Both of them have done wonderful. So you can't go wrong either way if you go with the Kalmbach Standard Crumble or you go with Chick House Reserve. So the next question is, can I start them on Chick House Reserve right away, or should I use a different feed to begin? You can start on Chick House Reserve right away. If you look at the back of the bag, we have the feeding directions. It will say for chicks intended to become laying hens from hatch until 16 weeks of age. So from the very first day those chicks hatch out of that egg, you can actually use Chick House Reserve. When we formulated this feed, we made sure that crumble was really, really nutrient dense, really a good quality crumble. So even those day-old baby chicks, if they couldn't eat any of the larger pieces, but they could eat the crumble, they were getting really good nutrition out of it. So it's a great quality feed. They may pick out the crumble for the first 2, 3, 4, 5 days of their life, but they'll start picking up the other pieces really quickly after that, and they do great on it. So the next question is, do you recommend using supplement powders in water like electrolytes and probiotics? So our feeds actually are fully fortified, meaning that they have the complete nutrition those chicks need. They also have probiotics in them. So one of our components of Lifeguard, and every feed example I have down here has Lifeguard in it. The Lifeguard seal is right here. If you see that Lifeguard seal, that means the probiotics are already in the feed. So you don't have to use the water supplements if you don't want to. I personally do not. I just do clean, fresh water and really high quality chick feed, and that's all I give to my birds. And they do really, really well on that. So it's up to you. If you do have a challenge, or if your birds were particularly stressed, then you might want to water, but just across the board, it's not something you always have to do. Okay, so the next question is, getting 5-week-old hens on 6-1, what feed should I give them to start out? So 5-week-old hens are typically going to be in the grower phase. So they've made it through the starter phase, now they're in the grower phase. If these birds are chicks intended to become laying hens, any of our Chick House start right, our 20% flock maker, all of those would be really good options. I would probably go somewhere around Chick House Reserve or 18% start right. It'll be up to you if you like the textured product or you like the crumble better. But that's probably the best feed for those 5-week-old future hens. The next question is, how best to introduce new chicks to a new coop? So if you don't already have existing birds in the coop, that transition is going to be really easy. So I usually take my birds out of their brooder box at around 2 weeks old. And I know when it's time to move them out when they start jumping up on the sides of the brooder box. So that's going to be your first indication that they need to get into a larger space. Because if they jump on the sides of the brooder box and they jump out and they can't get back in underneath their heat source, they're going to get in trouble. They could get chilled. If they get too cold, they could actually die. So as soon as they seem like they're starting to jump out of their brooder box, I go ahead and switch them over to their coop. Now, if you do that after they have their feathers, you don't have to have supplemental light. You won't have to have a heat lamp or a heat plate or anything like that out there for them. But if they're not fully feathered yet, you probably need to consider some way to give them that extra temperature that they're going to need before they're fully feathered. So the next question is, how important is it to maintain temperature for chicks after they hatch, and why? It's extremely important. So a baby chick is really fascinating. So I just think it's amazing that this little teeny tiny 50-gram chick can find its own feed, it can find its own water, and it can actually survive all on its own, with the exception that it cannot regulate its body temperature. And so providing that supplemental heat, we're actually mimicking what it's like for that baby chick to tuck under the wings of the mama bird. So a chicken's natural body temperature is actually somewhere around 105 degrees. So just day to day, they're pretty warm. Like if you went home and you took the temperature of your chicken and you didn't know that, you'd think you had a pretty sick chicken. But actually their temperature is pretty hot. They're little furnaces. And so underneath that mama's wing, it's really warm. And that's how they keep themselves warm. Without feathers, which is one of their primary ways to regulate their temperature, they need our help. They can't do it on their own. They don't shiver. Well, they will shiver, but they can't generate enough heat to keep themselves warm without a mama bird's help or without our help. So it's extremely important. If the temperature fluctuates too much, that's very stressful, and that's one of the main causes of pasty butt. If they get way too cold, they're going to pile on top of each other and the ones on the bottom can get suffocated. So it's very important to make sure it's about 90 to 95 degrees in your brooder box when you bring home those 1, 2, or 3 day old baby chicks. The next question is, how long do you feed a medicated feed to baby chicks? So the medicated feeds can be fed all the way through the starter grower phase. So you could feed it all the way for 4 or 5 months until you switch to a layer feed. You can do that. For meat birds, Amprolium, which is the vast majority of medicated feeds are medicated with Amprolium, you can actually feed that all the way up until the day you butcher those birds. There's no withdrawal for Amprolium. So you can actually feed that all the way up until the last day that you actually butcher those birds. It's really common for people to feed the medicated feed only through the starter phase, or just 1 or 2 bags through the birds before they switch over. That's fine. You are giving them a little bit of prevention against coccidiosis while their immune system develops. So it's really up to the consumer. A lot of people do non-medicated straight from the beginning, but there's no set guideline that says you have to feed it for X number of weeks for it to be effective, because it's one of those things that's working as they're eating it. They're not building it up in their system. It's not something that's causing an immune response. It's really there to help prevent the cocci from continuing to grow. Okay, the next question is, how much grit do I need? And I'm in Michigan and it's still cold. Should I wait a little longer to put them outside? So you actually don't need any grit. It's up to you if you choose to use grit. Grit helps with overall digestion, but it's really important if you're feeding whole grains like whole corn or whole barley or whole wheat. But the idea of grit, or what grit does, is it actually helps those birds grind up their feed. But when we make crumbles and we make pellets, we actually grind up the feed for them. So we actually do that work for them. They don't have to actually have grit in order to digest this, because it's already pre-ground. Now, Hen House Reserve and Chick House Reserve does have some whole grains in it. And because of that, we do have a little bit of grit already in these products. So it's already there. So you don't have to feed it. It is one of those things where if you choose to feed it, it won't cause any harm. The birds will pick at it if they want it, and they'll leave it alone if they don't. But you don't have to use it. The next question is, what kind of illnesses are not treatable? So those are usually going to be the types of illnesses that are viral. Most viruses have to run their course because antibiotics don't work on viruses. Obviously, antibiotics work on bacteria. So some viruses are not treatable, but there are ways that you can help those birds work through any challenges if they are challenged. So there are ways you can help them. There are ways you can prevent secondary infections, but you'd want to talk to your veterinarian about the proper course of treatment if you think you have a disease that's viral in nature and particularly is not treatable. So the next question is, I have 13 mixed breeds. I'm currently feeding the 22% protein meat bird. I've been seeing a lot about protein causing more ammonia in the feces. I have a mix of Olive Eggers, Wellborns, Rhode Island Reds, and Jersey Giants, and I was planning on either selling or calling my roosters. Should I consider something different? So I think that's a really good question to point out. As I mentioned before, we usually feed our slower growing, smaller bodied birds on the lower end of our protein spectrum, our 18 to 20% range. Higher protein feeds like 22%, 24s, 28, all those things, birds can eat those, but they can only utilize so much of the nitrogen or the protein in that feed. And what makes protein protein is a nitrogen bond. So back to our chemistry classes and our biochemistry classes, what makes it protein? It has a nitrogen bond. And so they can only excrete so much, or only use so much protein. All that extra protein has to be excreted. And humans, we excrete excess protein through our pee, right? But birds can't actually pee. They excrete protein as the white stuff that's on their poop called uric acid. And that extra nitrogen, that uric acid, breaks down to ammonia gas. And ammonia gas is what stinks in your chicken coop, makes your eyes burn and it smells bad in there. So usually if I walk into a chicken coop and I'm overwhelmed by that smell, I pretty much know they're overfeeding protein and they probably have an opportunity to reduce the amount of protein they're using. your kidneys do that work. And so over time, if you're excessively feeding protein, yes, that is taxing to the kidneys. But even more important for our young girls, for our ready to lay pullets, if we're feeding high protein to those birds right before they lay eggs, like really high protein, egg size and protein are directly related. So on the commercial side, if we want to control the size of our eggs, we actually change the protein content of the feed. So the more protein, the larger the egg typically. And the detriment to that is our very young girls, for their first eggs or their first few eggs, if they're fed too much protein, they can actually lay really big eggs. And it's hard for them to lay those, it can be hard for them to lay those really big eggs. So we have more cases of egg-bound birds. We have more cases of prolapse, just generally more trauma as she gets used to laying eggs. So it's better to control that protein when those birds are getting close to laying. So I don't have any problem with a higher protein for a chick the first 4, 6, or even 8 weeks of their life. But if they're getting to within a month or 2 of laying their eggs, I think it's a good idea to start to think about lowering that protein so you can control that egg size when they do get old enough to lay those eggs. So we'll do one more question, and then we're going to take questions from everybody in the chat. So the next question is, can I take chicks to the coop at 5 weeks if the weather is good? I'm sick of them in my house. Yes, you can, absolutely. So I like to keep my birds in the brooder box until they are fully feathered. Now, if they start jumping out, I'll go ahead and take them to the coop. My brooder boxes, which are typically just cattle waterers, they'll start jumping out of those brooder boxes at around 1.5 to 2 weeks old. I will take them and I'll put them in the coop, but I'll keep them locked in there until they're fully feathered. As soon as they have their feathers, they can actually start to go outside. So that's usually somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks of age, depending on the breed. You want to be really careful when you start letting them out because they are tiny, so they're really susceptible to predators. So you want to make sure you're watching them, or they're in a really, really safe environment if you let them out. But you can actually let them out around 3 or 4 weeks of age once they have their feathers, because they can regulate their temperature. If it's going to storm or if it's extremely cold, you might not want to do that because they're still not really great at it. But if it's a nice pretty day, yeah, let them outside. They'll love it. They love it. So that's it for our pre-submitted questions that are related to chicks. If anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat. We will make sure we go through all of them. And we really, really appreciate you guys joining us today. As always, we love talking about chickens, and we love doing these webinars for you guys. So thank you so much for spending your evening with us. And we'll go over the rest of the questions right now.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for hanging in there with us. We are going to go back up to the top and go over a lot of the questions that we didn't answer. I was reading along the whole time that the webinar was showing. So there were a few questions I saw submitted early that we did cover with the pre-submitted questions. So that's why I didn't respond right away. But make sure you put those questions in there if you have them. We'll try to hit most of the chick related questions first. If we have time, we'll go back over some of the adult birds. I probably will hit a few adult bird questions that were repeated quite a few times. As we go, Bonnie's also going to have some great links she's going to share, because we've covered a lot of the information that you guys have asked about in some of our previous webinars. We have a YouTube channel at Kalmbach Feeds where all of our webinars are organized. So we will share the link to that. You can go and you can look up our molting webinar from last fall. Last spring, we did a chick webinar where we talked about brooder setup, where we talked about pasty butt in particular. I even showed some examples of pasty butt, what to do, why that happens. And then again, one of our best resources and our brand new resource we're going to have is going to be our chick course. So make sure you sign up for those. Those should help answer almost all the questions that I've seen so far. But let's head back up to the top and we'll start going over everyone's chick questions. And I'll stick with you until we answer them all if you want to. But for the sake of time, we'll try to keep it brief. I have a hard time doing that when we talk about chicks. So let's find our first question. I'm still on the states where everyone was from. Okay, so what's the ideal protein to feed to peahen chicks and quail chicks? So most of what we talked about in the webinar pertains specifically to chickens. I did talk briefly about ducks. Most of our game birds are actually going to need higher protein feeds from the time that they're very young. We do have a couple of high protein feed options. We have a 28% game bird starter. It's in our Wild Flush line, which is our game bird line of feeds. And then we also have a really good non-medicated option if you're looking for that. It's the 28% Start Right turkey and game bird feed. It's in our non-GMO line because all of our non-GMO feeds are non-medicated. So if you require a non-medicated option, a high protein non-medicated option, that's the one to look for there. But usually those very young the starter phase, so that before feathers phase that we talk about so much, for those game birds and those birds that are really going to be feather focused, like our peahens and our pea chicks, those guys are going to be somewhere in the 24 to 28% protein range. I saw someone else in the chat, we'll get to it too, but I saw someone else who mentioned they had Somanis and they wanted to feed high protein, or their breeder recommended high protein feed for those. Those birds, it depends on what you're raising those birds for. They are raised as meat birds, of course, because that black meat is pretty popular, but they're also raised as laying hens. If you're raising them for laying hens, you don't need to start off with those really high protein feeds. Somewhere in the 20% protein range is probably where you want to be for those birds. If you are raising them for meat purposes, then you'll want to go higher, but it just depends on what you intend to rear those birds for. Okay. Everyone loves Hen House Reserve. That is true. Hen House Reserve is great. So Bonnie's going to throw some polls up there. Make sure you take your polls. We are going to give away some free feed tonight. So take your polls. We might do some questions here at the end, depending on how long it takes to give away some more free feed. But make sure you you take that. We'll use some of this information to do some free giveaways. So someone asked about the supply of chicks in their area. Chicks have been in short supply this year, really across the nation. This has been an amazing year for backyard poultry. I am so excited for what the year has to hold. Every time I give a poultry seminar, anytime I talk to people about poultry, I really want more people to get involved. If you take the time to come to these webinars, you take the time to take the chick course to learn, then you're going to be well prepared to take on this new task. So if you're a first timer, or you're not a first timer, maybe you've had 4 or 6 birds for a few years now and you're ready to add new birds to your flock, this has been an extremely popular year to do that. So chick shortages have been nationwide. We have to set those, hatcheries have to set those eggs, well in advance from their breeder flocks. So sometimes you can get on waiting lists. And I have heard quite frequently about people who aren't able to get new chicks if they want specific types or specific breeds. Some of those waiting lists are going all the way out until the fall. So yep, common across the board. So Suzette asked if that was a sapphire gem I was holding in the grower phase, and it was. So that pretty little dusty gray pullet was a sapphire gem. She was a sweetheart. Another question from Sarah said, how old are chicks when they switch? So I'm going to assume that the switch was switched to layer feed. But if you're talking about switching from a starter to a grower feed, it's really common today. So there are starter phases and grower phases, and those birds are doing different things with their body in those 2 phases. But it's really common today for feeds to be combined so that you have one feed, a starter grower feed, that meets the nutrient needs of that bird through both of those phases. Excuse me, through both of those phases. And Kalmbach Feeds does that. So most of our feeds are going to be starter grower feeds. It really helps keep feeding easy. You don't have to worry about when to switch. You don't have to do so much with feed allowances and all that kind of stuff. So one feed, you use it from the time those chicks hatch until either those birds are ready to lay eggs or you're ready to harvest those birds if you're doing meat birds. When you switch to a layer feed, is at about 4 months of age. So when those birds reach right about 4 months of age, or 16 weeks, is when those birds are old enough to go ahead and switch over to a layer feed. Okay. Let's see. So Sherry asked, will a link to this recording be available? Yes. Everyone here will receive a link to the recording. So you will definitely get those. We will also send it out in an email, and then it'll be part of our YouTube channel as well. So Bonnie has shared, and if she hasn't already, because I haven't scrolled down in a few minutes, if she hasn't already, she will share the link to where you can find this webinar and all of our other webinars on YouTube. So if you want to go in and watch those, you definitely can. Carrie asks if you should add extra methionine to your feed to help your birds during the molt. You usually won't need to do that. So most feeds, all Kalmbach feeds, and most feeds in general, are going to have enough methionine for those birds to properly build their feathers. It is common to increase the amount of protein that people will feed. So sometimes they'll go up to a higher protein feed. Maybe you're going to go from a 17 to a 20% protein, or somewhere in that range, or 16 to an 18 during the molt, because that higher protein usually also has higher methionine. So you don't have to add lots of supplements. You shouldn't need to do that. First of all, those are probably going to be pretty concentrated supplements, so you have to be careful about how much you add and kind of know where your ranges are, and they're really expensive. So I would just stick with a really good high quality feed through the molt, and you should be good for that. So Wendy asks, how many weeks do you feed the medicated feed if you choose to go the medicated route? And we did cover that in the pre-submitted questions, but I will answer this one again because I did see it quite a few times. That's up to you, the consumer. So it's perfectly okay to feed a medicated starter grower feed all the way through the starter and the grower phase. So all the way from hatch till those birds start to lay eggs. If you want to do that, you can. If you're raising meat birds, you can also feed medicated all the way from hatch until the time that you butcher those birds. There's no withdrawal for amprolium, so you can do that as well. There are quite a few people who just prefer to feed medicated feeds for a short period, so maybe just through the starter phase, which would be the first 3 weeks or so of age. It's really up to you what you feel most comfortable doing. But there's no set timeline where you have to feed it for X number of days in order for it to be effective. It works very quickly to prevent the cycle of cocci. So cocci's reproductive cycle, the actual parasite's reproductive cycle, is about 7 to 10 days. So it works pretty quickly in that 7 to 10 day range to prevent the new eggs from that protozoa from being laid. So you don't have to feed it for extremely long periods of time if you don't want to. It just depends on what you're most comfortable with. So Vicki asks, why aren't my Muscovy ducks laying at 18 months old? The first thing you probably want to check is to make sure Muscovies are actually not prolific layers. They're okay layers, but they're really more of a common meat duck breed that people will choose. They're pretty good layers, but they're not the top tier when it comes to ducks. So it's very possible that those birds, because they're bigger bodied, like meat strains of birds, maybe they got a little bit too big and so they're spending too much time eating and that kind of stuff, and they're not concentrating necessarily on laying. They're not very prolific layers, so they'll tend to lay a little bit and then take long breaks. So you may be in one of those long breaks. And then the 18-month, that age really stood out to me because it is very common for birds to have a natural molt at right around 18 months of age. Even if that's right at peak production time, sometimes we will see those birds molt naturally at that particular age. So those might be just a few reasons why they're not laying. Give it a little more time. Make sure they're eating a good quality feed, not a whole lot of extras, and then hopefully those girls will start laying for you. Okay, medicated question. Okay, so Wendy asks, which feed would you use when you begin integrating your younger chicks into your current flock? So I feed mine separately. as long as I possibly can. I like a really good starter grower feed for those birds. They are growing at a rapid rate when they are very young. So the nutrition that is specific to that particular age range for those birds is really important to make sure they're putting on their body mass like they should, they're filling out the way they should, and preparing to be really good future layers. If you cannot feed the birds separately for as long as possible, if you have to feed everybody, your new babies and your older birds, the same feed, then everyone should get a good quality starter grower feed, and your hens should get a supplemental calcium source. That's going to be your best bet. Probably the best compromise you can make for everyone if you cannot feed them separately. So Doris, I'm just going to point out, Doris says, I love organic feed. So I just want to point out, it's not a question, just a statement, but I do want to make sure I point out to everyone, I tried when we picked our feeds that we showed in the background to show you guys the nice range we have. We have all natural feeds. We also have non-GMO, and we have organic. So if those are things that you're looking for, non-GMO, organic, all natural, all of those, we really do have something out there for everyone. If you have questions about those specifically, let us know. We can help you pick the right feed. Oh, Vicki mentioned her chickens are 18 months old. So as I mentioned before, one of the reasons why there's a natural molt that happens at 18 months often, if you check into that a little bit, that might be why your birds stopped laying at 18 months old. Doris has a chick with that's breathing heavily, not sure the problem. So just check on that chick often, make sure the air quality inside your coop is good, that it's eating well, that it doesn't have, that it feels normal, that its crop is filling and emptying normal. If it doesn't start to heal up on its own, or doesn't start to go away on its own, then you might want to consult a veterinarian and see if you can figure out why that bird has that particular issue. Okay, so I was reading the chain about the coops. How do you keep them dry? They're just really muddy this time of year. What are some things you can do to help with that? So all of the comments that people made were very helpful, and all things that people can try. Chickens do, while we do see very pretty stylized photos of chickens pecking around in their nice grassy runs, the reality of it is those chickens tear up those runs in no time at all. And so you do end up with a dry lot. So you do end up with usually a dirt run if you can't move your coop around, or you can't rotate your run around your coop. When that happens, all the things people mentioned are really great options. I've used straw in the past in my old runs. I have, and I found that actually worked pretty well. They scratch it up. I just keep adding new straw. It does break down fairly well, so you don't end up with a huge mess with it. It does eventually all break down. There are some treatments you can put in the dirt, hydrated lime and things like that, that can help with the smell. If it's not overly wet, that can also help dry it out a little bit. Barn dry products like that can definitely help, but just take some steps to try to fix that. Really good drainage will go a long way in helping those runs dry out. So if you find places where water pools, if you can dig just a little ditch to get that to drain off, that will definitely help. Shelly asks, should I use medicated feed periodically and not all the time? So if you have layers, no, because you're not going to find a really good layer feed that's medicated with, that has a medication for the prevention of coccidiosis on a store shelf. There are some water treatments you can use, but a lot of those water treatments are going to be treatment levels, not prevention levels. So it's going to be something where if you have an outbreak, you're going to use a treatment level. When the chicks are young, it's up to you whether you want to use a medicated feed periodically. If you've had issues with cocci in the past with your flock, it's not a bad idea to do the preventative measure. But for me personally, I actually don't switch back and forth. I would if I thought I had a problem. But unless I see a problem, I stay my course, let my chickens be chickens. And that seems to work quite well in my experience. So really, you're just going to have to weigh how your birds do if you've ever had issues before in the past, and then use that information to determine how you want to manage your feed. Okay, someone mentioned they have a bird with a poopy butt, so maybe a chronic diarrhea bird. There may be something wrong in the digestion of that bird. If it's not going away with treatment, so if you've tried different treatment options and it's not helping, that bird may just have a poor digestive capacity. One thing you should try is a feed that has Lifeguard, because Lifeguard has probiotics, and those really good bacteria help with overall digestion. So I would definitely give that a shot. If you're not already using a feed with Lifeguard, or you're not already using a probiotic, definitely give that a shot to help with that chronic diarrhea. Sarah asks, do you like pellets or crumbles better? So this would be for birds in the grower phase or for adult birds. Those teeny tiny babies in the starter phase usually need a crumble just because of the size. I personally am a pellet feeder. I feed pellets. I find the birds, there's less waste. If they kick it out and it gets in the bedding, they can actually find it and pick it back up. So I prefer pellets. But I've also found in my experience, it's very regional. So people in the north love crumbles. People in the south love pellets. I'm not sure why, but that's the way it is. So it's really up to you what you prefer. But I am personally a pellet feeder. Although I have switched back and forth from pellets to crumbles, my birds seem to do fine on both of them. Don't mind either one. But I personally prefer pellets. So Deanna asks, I've heard you can't keep turkeys with chickens, but I've seen people do it. So the reason why you're not supposed to keep turkeys with chickens is a disease called blackhead. And blackhead is caused by histomonas. Chickens and turkeys can get histomonas. But chickens tend to be asymptomatic carriers. So they get it and they don't have problems with it. Turkeys get it and it leads to a disease called blackhead. And so that's why you'll hear not to have them together. If turkeys do get histomonas, they go downhill very fast. They're very susceptible to it. It looks terrible. They lose all oxygenation in their heads. They turn black. That's why it's called blackhead. And eventually your turkeys can die from it. So that's the reason why you will see that. People will do it because they either their flocks don't have histomonas, or maybe they're taking a chance. But that's the reason why you'll hear not to keep them together. Okay. So Heather asked about her chickens, or her adult birds are, I believe this is crossing the highway. I believe she's having problems with them not staying where they're supposed to stay. And that's going to happen. Chickens don't understand boundaries very well, not easily trained. And so if your birds are going to your neighbor's house or scratching up their mulch or going places they're not supposed to be, some things you should try, of course, is building a nice, really good quality run. Keeping them inside for longer periods of time during the day. So if it's an option for you, if you can do it, maybe you keep the birds in for most of the morning and then don't let them out until the afternoon, or maybe you have to keep them in all day and only let them out in the afternoons. That's, not often ideal for most of us, but those are just some things that you can try. Make sure wherever they're supposed to be has everything that they need: food, water, shelter, shade, all of that kind of stuff. Because if their basic needs aren't met where they're supposed to be, of course they're going to move to find something to find. Maybe it's a watering source or a really good feed source or something like that. So just one of the best ways you can do that is a really nice, good run that keeps them contained for a little longer. Okay, so Caitlin asks, is it okay to put new hatchlings with 1-week-old chicks? Sure, Caitlin. Yeah, you can do that. So you can have different ages of your chicks and put those birds together. I've done it successfully before. Sarah's birds were actually together. Our starter birds and our grower birds were together, and they were doing just great. You want to make sure when you do that that the birds are eating the same type of feed. So they're everyone's on starter grower, that kind of thing. You don't want to have some on layer, some on starter grower, that kind of thing. You want to make sure everybody's eating the same kind. And then you want to make sure that the temperature requirements of the birds, whatever phases you're using, are fairly similar, because your teeny tiny baby chicks need it to be good and warm and your older birds don't. So you don't want it to be too hot for your older birds or not hot enough for your younger birds. So as long as they are fairly similar in their needs, they're going to do great together. Okay. What Sarah says, what would you say is a good temp to let them outside if they're feathered? If they are feathered, anything over, and I mean fully feathered. So let's say they're 3, 4, 5 weeks old, anything over 50 degrees and they go outside, they can probably do fairly well. They'll come back into their coop, make sure they can get back into their coop where they need to be, but they'll come back in. They do really well with that. The thing you have to watch is they're not great when they're really young about dealing with wild swings in temperatures or sudden downpours or things like that. So if they are very small, make sure you're close by if you decide to let them out, so that you can make sure to check on them often and handle it if something happens, like you have a sudden downpour. So William, or WM, asks about mixing scratch with layer pellets. I never recommend mixing anything into a complete feed. Anytime you mix something into a complete feed, you're diluting all of the nutrients. And so you don't want to mix anything into your feed. Mixing 2 complete feeds is probably about the only thing I'll ever say, that's not so bad, because complete food diluted by another complete food, you don't have that much dilution. But if you're mixing anything else in there, you're diluting all the nutrients out. You're taking that complete well-balanced feed and you're unbalancing it. So try not to do that. If you want to feed scratch to your birds, that's great, but do it as a treat or an extra, and it shouldn't be any more than about 10% of your total feed intake. Okay, so Sarah Shelton says, if you bought chicks at a feed store and they aren't vaccinated, can you have them vaccinated later? That's very difficult to do. There are a few vaccines that you may be able to buy, but the vast majority of vaccines are going to be in 1,000 bird doses, 10,000 bird doses. You get, some of them are interocular, intranasal, meaning that you spray the vaccine on the bird and then they breathe it in. But some of them are actual wing sticks where you actually have to stick the vaccine in the wing of the bird. So it's really difficult to get them vaccinated later. By far, the easiest thing to do is have it done at the hatchery if you're going to have it done. Okay, so chickens in general, what's the easiest? This is Colleen. What's the easiest way to move or transport if you're relocating? You want to make it as less stressful as possible. So if I am relocating chicks, I try to do it in the evening. I do it in the evening. I'll take them to their new coop. They will be in their new coop overnight. And so it's very calm. It's very dark. It's not bright. It's not scary. And so generally doing it in the evening, plus it's a lot easier to catch them if you go in there and it's dark and they're at their old home and they're already up on their roosts. You can catch them. You can take them to their new place. It's a lot easier to do it that way. But best thing to do is try to keep your birds together with their current group, with their current pecking order. If they're going to move to a new location, which is stressful, don't move them to a new location which has a whole bunch of other birds, which doubles the stress, or to a new location where you're still in the process of building your house and the contractors are banging. That's triple the stress. So those are all things to kind of consider when you're moving those birds, trying to keep the stress as low as possible. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so make sure you guys scroll up and look at Bonnie Brannigan's comments. She has shared links to a lot of the different products, to a lot of the places on our website. One thing I do want to point out to everyone, go to kalmbachfeeds.com. At the upper right hand of the screen, you'll see learn more about. If you click on that, you can go to chickens, and we have 40 articles. A lot of the articles pertain to some of the questions that you guys have asked today, written by me or written by some of our colleagues. So they're really applicable articles that answer a lot of these questions. Go to that website, use that source. It's a great library of information. We write the articles based on what you guys want to hear. So, oh, yeah, Bonnie's putting it up right now. Learn more about, click on chickens, and you'll see all these great articles. If you're on our email list, these are the articles that are emailed every week. So if you wanted to go back, if you saw one, you know, last year that you thought was great, but you can't remember it, or you can't find it anymore in your email, it's going to be right there on our website. A lot of the stuff that you guys are interested in knowing about will be found there. Okay. Oh, good. I'm so glad. JRE 2012 says, can't wait to take the chick course. Thank you. We really worked hard on this one. We started to think about it before 2023. And so we were like, oh, how can we really keep people interested, get more people to get chicks? We didn't know that backyard chickens were going to take off the way that they did in the last quarter, in the last 3 to 4 months. But we really put this together, worked hard on getting it all out there. And so we hope that you guys will enjoy it and get a lot of good information out of it. Hi, Kim. I'm glad we met at the OSU Poultry Clinic. Okay, so Bonnie says Janice is our random winner for a free bag of feed. So hopefully Janice saw that. Andrea has asked, are there any Kalmbach webinars specifically for broilers? We have not done a broiler specific webinar yet, but we certainly could. So we will definitely write that down as one of our ideas. Suzette asks the difference between organic feed versus non-GMO, which is better? Is organic feed also non-GMO? Oh, it wants me to put an emoji here. And vice versa. Non-GMO can either be organic or not. So confusing. Okay, so yes, that is correct. The primary difference between organic and non-GMO is how those grains, the grains that we use in the feed, corn and soybean particularly, how they are grown. So organic is also non-GMO. If something is USDA certified organic, it also has to be non-GMO. But non-GMO does not have to be organic. So what that means is the inputs that a farmer uses on their farm to grow their crops. So if they want to grow non-GMO corn, for example, they actually have a lot of options on the fertilizers they want to use, any herbicides they want to use, that kind of stuff. They can use a lot of the traditional things to fertilize their land or to use as a herbicide on their crops. They're not likely to use it. It's not that they can't, but they're not likely to use glyphosate, which is what most people care about because that's the main genetic modification. So if they spray glyphosate, they're going to kill their crop. So they're not likely to do that. It's not that they can't at all, but they're not likely to. But other fertilizers and things, they can use whatever input they think is necessary to actually grow their crop, they can use it. Organic is very, very restricted. So they are very limited on what they can use as far as fertilizers are concerned, or any herbicides or any pesticides or anything like that. So those are very tightly regulated by the USDA in order to be certified organic. So that's the main difference, how you raise those crops or what inputs you can use on your farm. But you're right, Suzette, it is very confusing. Organic is non-GMO, but non-GMO is not necessarily organic. Okay, so Sherry asked, well, this was a hard question, Sherry. I'm going to answer it though. I'm not scared of the hard questions. Do the male chicks left over at the hatchery become animal protein for other animals? So that really depends. They can become meat birds. They can become straight run birds. But as everybody on this chat is probably very clearly obvious, the females are actually in more demand. Most people are looking for chicks that are intended to become laying hens. So they're looking for female birds. And so we do often have more demand for the females. And then sometimes the males If we don't have enough demand for those, sometimes they do become animal protein. So yes, that can happen, but hopefully most of them, and especially this year, a lot, are going to be straight run birds, broiler chickens, pasture birds, those types of things. So there are lots of different options for them. So Haley says, do you recommend supplements such as kelp or green algae to help with meat bird development? You could use those, but you don't have to. So the green algae is typically going to be an omega supplement. One of the main ways those are used in a lot of different species is to help the birds regulate their temperature. So for meat birds in particular, especially in the hottest of the summertime when they don't handle the temperature very well, I can see some where there might be some use for that. But for the most part, because their growth cycle is only 6 to 8 weeks, you don't often see that. Okay, so Haley also asks, is there any nutritional value to feeding chickens or adult birds spent grains from local breweries? Sure, there is. But most of our spent grains are going to be very high fiber. And because they're very high fiber, they're actually used a lot in ruminant nutrition, far more in ruminant nutrition than they are in poultry nutrition. So cows, dairy cows in particular, actually use the vast majority of spent grains from breweries. But yes, there is some nutritional value there. They use most of the energy, of course, to make the alcohol, because that's the whole point. So as the grain is fermenting, it's using up all the carbohydrates and all the energy. So all of that is gone. And what's left is usually high fiber and a little bit of protein. Okay, so Christine asks, can you touch on fermenting feed? So I actually am not a huge fan of fermenting feed. I think, and I'm going to tell you why. Fermentation can work if you're really good at it. But the detriment to fermentation is actually a chemical reaction. And so I find a lot of times, instead of fermenting feed, so actually changing the pH, actually having more volatile fatty acids that are generated, a lot of times people aren't doing that. They're just soaking their feed. And fermentation, remember, you have to have the actual chemical reaction to get the added benefit. So if you're just soaking your feed, you're not getting that added benefit. And soaking feed can cause mold because you're getting it wet. And we do a lot of work to keep them dry so that we don't have mold. But you'll get mold, and then even more dangerous than mold, you can get mycotoxins. So I don't think the benefit of fermentation outweighs the risk. And so I'm not one who's going to recommend fermenting feeds. But if you can do it and you can do it really well, there are some small benefits to it. But it's one of those things where you probably should really know what you're doing before you give it a shot. Okay. Let's see. Bonnie also mentioned on here quite a bit about finding our local dealers. If you go to our Kalmbach website, there's a where to buy link. You just put in your zip code and you can find your dealer. So Sarah asks, is it okay for a rooster to eat layer feed? So I'm going to answer about 3 more questions, guys, because we're already 7:30. I'll answer 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap up for the day. I don't want to hold everybody up because I'm already seeing the participation drop. But for Sarah, is it okay for a rooster to eat layer feed? So that depends. A long time ago, and by a long time ago, I only mean like a decade. The hen was really the queen of the coop. We really were concerned about our hen. Our primary focus was egg production and our hens. Our roosters were just along for the ride. So we fed our roosters just like we fed our hens, usually a complete layer feed, which was high in calcium. And the roosters ate that, and they had to digest that excess calcium. So a layer hen needs about 3 to 4% calcium. A rooster only needs about 1% or less. So he's eating 3 to 4 times more calcium than he actually needs, and he has to digest. He has to break that all down, digest it, and excrete it. And that can be taxing on his digestive tract. And over time, it can lead to problems with his function of his internal organs. And so That's one of the reasons why this has become a really hot topic. The more people think of their poultry as pets, or if they have a rooster that's just a really good breeder and he's making them a lot of money, or he's just really important to you, you love the silly guy, and you think of your poultry as pets, you start thinking about, how can I feed this bird so I'm making sure I'm meeting all of his needs and I don't want to cause any harm. So those problems that bird could have are things that may happen. They may happen, they may not. But if they do happen, you would feel awfully bad because you love this rooster, that the way you fed him may have caused the problem that he has. And so today we find a lot of people who are interested in feeding that rooster to make sure they're not forcing him to consume too much calcium. Our number one recommendation when this is a concern for your flock is Hen House Reserve. Hen House Reserve is a complete layer feed, but it has multiple independent sources of calcium. So your laying hens, your birds that need that calcium, can get in there and eat that calcium, but your rooster can leave it out. So he can self-regulate his calcium consumption, and that actually mitigates a lot of that issue, those problems with overconsumption of calcium. So that's why that question's become really popular in the last few years. As more people think of their poultry as pets, we answer this question a lot more often, and Hen House Reserve is the feed we recommend time and time again for that one. Okay, next question is going to be Doris. So I'm going to answer this question and one more after this. What can you do with pasty butt? So pasty butt is one of those things that birds can get. They usually get it when their digestive tract is immature. So remember, when that chick hatches, it has to start developing its digestive tract from day one. If that bird is stressed, then oftentimes it's hard for them to digest feed. And stress comes from being in shipment too long. It comes from big swings in temperature. So you're letting it get too hot, too cold, too hot, too cold. That's very stressful for the birds. That can make pasty butt worse. Low quality feeds can cause pasty butt. There are lots of different things, but usually it's stress related. It's when the poop sticks to their butt. So the feed stuff actually doesn't get digested well. The poop is sticky and it sticks to their bottom. If you have pasty butt, you have to make sure to remove that pasty butt. The birds have to be able to poop. As their digestive tract matures, it usually clears up on its own in about 7 to 10 days. But if you see that poop sticking to their butt, make sure you remove that so they can keep pooping. Until their enzymes actually start working and they really start digesting that feed, they can get it. But as soon as those enzymes really start working and moving and they're really digesting feed well, it'll clear itself up. Check out our chick seminar from last year. It'll be on YouTube. We specifically talked about pasty butt and showed specific examples of that. So that should help a lot. It'll also be in the chick course. Okay. So I'm going to answer this question, even though it's not chick related. It was very commonly asked. It was asked a lot on the pre-submitted questions, and it's been asked in this chat. So going to be our last question for the day. I know we have a lot of messages, so I really appreciate everyone. But the last one is, how do you introduce new chickens into your established flock? Once again, I'm going to send you to YouTube because we covered this last year during our last year's chick seminar. So check that out. I showed you exactly how I do that in my coop. I was actually in my coop to show you exactly how I do that. But the best way to introduce new chicks to an established flock is once the birds come out of the brooder box and they're ready to go to the coop. If you can divide your coop so you can keep the new birds and the existing birds separate, but they can see each other. So a mesh screen is usually one of the best ways you can do that. If you can keep those birds so that they can see each other and get used to each other, but they can't get to each other, give it a little bit, a week or so. Let those birds live side by side for a while. Then free ranging or your run are your best friend in introducing new birds to an existing flock. So what I do is about an hour before dusk, I will open up the door. My existing flock free ranges all day anyway. I will open up the door and I will let the new babies out into the run or out to free range. just an hour before dusk. And I stand out there with them and I keep an eye on them. And the existing birds are kind of free ranging around, and they're making their way back to the coop because it's almost dusk. So they know those babies are there, and I'm there and I'm watching. And it's only an hour. They're going to come back in their coop. You'll shut them up for the night. And then the next day, do it for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And then slowly but surely increase that time that those two birds are allowed to free range together, those two flocks. And they'll slowly but surely kind of integrate together. And then once your birds are ready to, everybody's being fed the same feed or everybody's ready to graduate to laying hens, you remove the partition and your two flocks marry together and become one. And if you take the chick course, you're going to see that we follow along as I raise chicks all the way from the time those babies come from the hatchery until they graduate. The last module of the chick course is graduation day for the chicks. So when they graduate to laying hens, so you can see the whole thing all the way how they come together. And that's the best way I found to get two flocks to come together as one. Use free ranging to your advantage for that. Okay. So I think that's all the time. It's almost 7:40. So I think that's all the time we're going to have for questions. We really appreciate you guys spending your evenings with us. I could do probably 2 hours of nothing but Q&A. We don't even have to do a webinar maybe for the next one. We'll just do Q&A for the whole thing. But go in there, check out some of our resources that we already have. And we really, really appreciate you guys. Appreciate you guys joining us, logging on today, spending your evenings with us. We want to give away, let's see, we have a few more messages. Oh, there, thanks, and thank you, everyone. We want to give away a couple more bags of feed. So to the first person who types in the chat, the 2 main phases that your baby birds are going to go to is going to win a free bag of feed. Aaron. All right, Aaron got it. So I got to write down his name. Aaron, if you don't mind sending, let's see, we'll have your email because you signed up for the course. So I'm going to write your name down. Aaron Vittini wins. So you will get a free bag of feed. So we will send you an email to get that information from you. Congratulations to Aaron. And then let's see what we want the next one to be. What kind of chick was I holding that was dusty gray and it was the female during the grower section? All right, Suzette got that one. Okay, Sapphire Gem. She was a beautiful Sapphire Gem. Okay, Suzette, thank you so much. We will look up your email address. We will send you an email to get that free bag of feed to you. So thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate your time. We hope that this was really valuable for you, and we can't wait to do the next one. So thank you all, everyone, and we greatly appreciate it. Check out that chick course.